Nope.
I heard this is a place where I can post about weird encounters and events. One such event has led to the death of my roommate, and is the reason I can't sleep at night anymore. I don't know if anyone will believe me. I just want to unburden myself. So, to get to my attention grabber, I had a roommate that kept screaming every night. What I had originally thought to be an ordinary but problematic case of night terrors had turned out to be much worse. Much, much worse. It began when I moved out of state for school. The college of my choice had an incredible architectural program that I wanted to get into. There were two slight problems before moving. One was getting a job, which didn't prove too difficult in this college town. I managed to get a job at a local cafe where it seemed the whole student population wanted to congregate. The second problem, that seemed a little more challenging, was finding an apartment that I could afford. In this town, even a small room off campus was not cheap. By some miracle, I found one listing after seemingly endless hours of checking openings. The ad in question was for a small, 2-story house in an adjacent town that was within my price range. Considering how short of time I had before moving in time for the semester, and also considering there was nothing else I could afford, I immediately took the room. I moved into the house with a few possessions I took with me. The owner was a young woman, about my age, named Michelle. She was a slim-figured woman with a shade of yellow hair that almost looked white. Her eyes were also the bluest of blue I have ever seen in person. She was a really big help to me while I was moving my things into the house and unpacking. The house was a small, 2-story, Italianate-style home sitting on a luscious green lawn. The exterior was a marble white color with vines growing on its sides. The second floor was exposed by 3 windows looking in. The wide porch looked old and creaky and held a couple of lawn chairs that looked just as old. Michelle told me the house had belonged to her grandparents and needed some refurbishing. I thought the house looked beautiful. The style and setting combined with the right amount of aging gave the house a picturesque look. It could easily have come straight out of a painting, it was so beautiful. The first detail I noticed of Michelle was her sense of fashion. She was dressed in a dark, reddish-brown sweater and a brown scarf to blend with the color of autumn around her and the property. She completed the look with blue skinny jeans and black boots. The other detail I noticed, upon closer inspection, was the slight but recognizable bags under her eyes, which suggested to me she had been suffering from sleep deprivation. I wouldn't have noticed this given how much energy she gave off. She must have been caffeinated to the gills to help me out today. I didn't say anything to her though. I only had one chance to make a good first impression with my first roommate. Looking back on it now, I should have had reason to worry. We got done moving, and she showed me around the house. My room was on the main floor. It was a bare, green-walled, empty room, aside from a bed complete with a headboard, an antique dresser with a mirror attached to it, and an opened walk-in closet. My mind was already planning on how to decorate everything. Then she led me upstairs and informed me that her room was on the second floor. Now, as far as the rules go, she didn't really have a lot. At least none that were extreme, but she told me one. Actually, It wasn't so much a rule as it was a little warning that made me scratch my head in confusion. "I don't really remember doing it," she explained. "But people have told me that I tend to make noises late at night, and I tend to go on for a while. I lowered the rent because I feel like it's the least I could do if it bothers you. All I ask is if you hear anything from my room, don't worry about it. I'll be fine. But if it gets to be too much, I'll understand, and I'll even reimburse you." It was a strange rule, to be sure. Noises? What kind of noises? I then remembered the benefits I had living there, and I thought to myself maybe it wouldn't be such a big deal. Maybe she was just a loud moaner during some late night sessions, and she didn't want to put it into words for me. I did not press the issue. I just let her have her privacy. I was thoroughly exhausted after a long day of moving things into the new apartment, but Michelle was a big help. She purchased takeout that night, which she called her, quote, move-in special, which consisted of a pizza, some Chinese food, and an order of taquitos. I'd normally prefer something more nutritionally complete, but I wasn't in the mood to debate. My body was ready to devour every carb in sight. I inhaled a little bit of everything, sometimes mixing them together to create some kind of unholy abomination of takeout. The taste was funky and greasy, but I downed it all and felt like I could finish up with a pint of ice cream. With the help of my new roommate, I did. Exhaustion finally hit me like a brick wall, and I finally turned in for the night, resolving to decorate my room in the morning. I was awakened in the night by a sudden rumbling in my insides, and I darted to the bathroom. The mixture of Mexican, Chinese, and pizza had not been sitting well, and had turned my colon into a war zone. I exited the bathroom and heard a sound that reverberated through the otherwise quiet house. It took me a moment to realize it was screaming. A high-pitched, shrill screaming full of danger and fear that came from the second floor. I realized it was coming from Michelle. Forgetting what she told me earlier, I ran upstairs to her room and knocked on the door. Her screaming was all that responded. I tried turning the knob, only to find that it was locked. She kept screaming, and I could hear thrashing and thumping as if she was being thrown around the room. I called 911, and a police cruiser reached the house within minutes of my call. It was one officer who came, and I was struck by how similar he looked to Michelle. Slender body type, bright blonde hair, and blue eyes. He went by Officer Tears, and he was, in fact, Michelle's older brother. He had been on duty that night, and happened to be in the area when my emergency call went out. I had gone upstairs with him, and by that time, the screaming had stopped. He knocked on the door, and Michelle opened it within seconds. "Hey sis," he greeted with a smile at her drowsy face. "Your roomie said you were screaming, and I thought I'd check on you." "I'm okay, Ben. Thank you for checking." She ended by closing the door. Ben, or Officer Tears, walked back out after filling out a report and was about to enter his vehicle when I stopped him. What was that about?" I asked. The incident of her screaming and now being okay suddenly was kind of unnerving. "Michelle suffers from night terrors," he said, turning back to me. "She's had them for a long time now. It's okay though. They only sound worse than they really are. If it happens again, just call 911 and I'll be over quickly." After that, he drove off in his cruiser. I had walked back inside, feeling weird about that night. I wondered to myself if this was the noise Michelle was talking about. I saw her again that following morning. She looked more upbeat than I was expecting her to be. She was once again dressed in a fashionable sweater and jeans for her day. I asked her about the previous night, and she looked dumbfounded. I reminded her about the screaming. "I'm sorry," she said in a sad tone. "I don't really remember what happens, but everyone tells me I have night terrors. I guess I've had them since I was a kid. I'm sorry about last night, but it's really nothing to worry about. They don't last long, and I wake up just fine. If you want to leave, though, I'll understand." I felt sorry for her at that moment. I told her it was okay, as long as she wasn't hurting herself. Besides, where else would I even go? I stayed there for 2 weeks. Every night she had her screaming episodes. They would always occur between midnight and 3 a.m., going off and on in intervals. Just as I would think she was finally done and I could go back to sleep, she would start up again. I could hear her screaming during the night since her bedroom is right above mine. Sometimes I'd hear her walk around the room and thrash against the wall or furniture as if she was sleepwalking. I wouldn't be able to sleep during the whole time because the noise was so gut-wrenching that I could never just ignore it. During the mornings, she would look so positive and chipper on her way to class. Meanwhile, I felt like I didn't even get a wink of sleep. She'd be out with her cheeriness, and I started feeling resentment for her. I started looking for changes in my schedule to find some relief. I tried looking for night classes and night shifts. Cafes typically don't stay open overnight. I had to look for anything so that I would not be home during the night and hear Michelle screaming. I found a position as an overnight stalker at a major retail company. I also managed to get classes for the morning. I never saw Michelle much, but I was glad to not hear her night terrors anymore. It was on one of the rare instances where I would see her that I began to notice something else. I went into the bathroom one night and saw Michelle standing in front of the mirror. This was the first time I saw her without a sweater and jeans. This time, she wore a pink top and matching shorts. The skin of her exposed upper back showed signs of scarring and bruising. Her arms were also covered in bruises. I think I even saw traces of bite marks on her. The second time, I was home and I was checking her room upstairs. The room, which was open at the time, wasn't out of the ordinary. Some posters, a makeup table, and a bed filled the room. Then, the room suddenly felt cold and sinister, as if some unseen figure were inside and dared me to enter. Never in my life had I walked away from an empty room that fast. It wasn't until one particular night, where I was off from my classes and work, that I would finally understand the story behind Michelle's night terrors. I came home from running some errands and was ready to drop when I noticed a bright silver sedan in the driveway. I didn't recognize it. I walked inside to see Michelle, her brother Ben, and 2 other people I didn't recognize, carrying rolls of some sort of insulation material. Michelle introduced the 2 older people as her parents and explained that they were over to help soundproof her bedroom. Her parents greeted me instantly with cheerful smiles and somewhat tired looks on their faces. I felt bad that I wasn't helping them set everything up, but I had no energy for even the smallest chore, and I was not comfortable going back in that room. After my quick nap, I found everyone still downstairs. Michelle was going for takeout and wanted to know what I wanted. She left, and I got to know her parents a little more. I asked them why they were soundproofing her room. Michelle, they told me, had noticed that I had changed my schedule so that I could avoid her sleeping patterns and get some rest. She had felt so guilty because she really thought of me as a friend and wanted to make some accommodations for me. Then they told me about the origin of her nightly episodes. It all started when Michelle was 4 years old. The family was visiting her grandfather, whose mental health had been declining after the death of his wife. Whenever they talked to him, he would say very little, if anything at all, and had a blank look on his face. They had noticed, however, that whenever he looked at Michelle, he would have a look on his face that they could only describe as odd. They had spent the night there, thinking nothing of his behavior that evening. Later in the night, the parents heard a blood-curdling scream coming from Michelle's room. They darted to the room and found an obscured figure looming over her, wielding a large kitchen knife in its hand. The father had grabbed a lamp in the room and smashed it over the assailant's head. They switched on the overhead lights and found that the intruder was in fact the grandfather, who still held the knife in his hands. The impact of the blow had killed him instantly. Though she was physically uninjured, Michelle's young mind could not process that event that had just happened. What resulted was years and years of night terrors in which Michelle would scream her lungs out. It also was not unusual for her to throw herself around the room and sustain different kinds of injuries. I had felt even worse than before after hearing about her tragic origin story. I had complained about how her screams were keeping me up at night, but she was the one who had gone through a traumatizing event. I think I would be more surprised if she did not have night terrors after something like that. Since I was off that night, it was one of the rare nights that I was home and was able to fall asleep instantly. The soundproofing must have done the trick, because I did not recall hearing Michelle scream at all. But I think I would have preferred the screams to what came next. I had a vivid nightmare that night that I could still recall with clear detail. I was in Michelle's room, and I had been screaming in the silent darkness. I was afraid no one would hear me, and no one would come to help. Above me was a dark silhouette of a person, whose face gradually came into detail. It was the face of an older man, wide-eyed and a large grin splitting his face. He was what I was screaming at. I saw him throw me to the window outside. The glass shattered, and I fell to the ground. I woke up to the sound of shattered glass and a large thud just outside my window. I rushed to the window, and I saw the bruised and still body of Michelle on the driveway. She was motionless, and a pool of blood began to form around her head. I was horrified by what looked like a suicide when I heard laughing from above me. I turned my head upwards to Michelle's shattered bedroom window, and my heart dropped. leaning over the shattered window, with a look of glee on his face, was the same grinning, insane man from my nightmare. I was sure he was looking at me before he disappeared. I had called 911 just like before, and once again, Ben pulled up to the house in his police cruiser. He stood frozen while looking at the lifeless cadaver that had once been his younger sister. An ambulance appeared behind him and took his sister away. They did not switch on the sirens or lights. No point to it, as it was too late. This time, Ben was not alone on his patrol, and both he and his partner grilled me about what happened. I think they were trying to pin me to her death as if I was the one that killed her. I wanted to tell the truth, but what was I going to say? That some psychotic man had thrown her out of the window and then literally vanished before my eyes? If I said that, forget jail. I'd go straight to the psychiatric unit. I told them I didn't know what happened, that I just woke up and found her dead outside my window. I think Ben really vouched for me at that point and ruled that his sister's death was an accidental suicide. I packed up the next day, quit my job, and dropped out of school before heading back home. I wanted to go anywhere I could just get away from that house. I never wanted to go back there. But that's not how my story ends. Whatever that thing was, it followed me back to my home. Sometimes I'd be asleep or awake, and I'd see that insane, grinning man hovering above me. And then I become the one that is screaming. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this week's story. If you did, you know what to do. Take that like button, throw it around the room, and eventually just chuck it out of the window. Shout out to the author of this story, Reddit user ObjectiveTell6047. That is ObjectiveTell6047. A unique name, but I will leave a link down below where you can check them out, and a link to the original No Sleep post as well. Guys, I think it's safe to say that any day now, I'm going to post a separate standalone video to announce my book that's going to be ready to be purchased on Amazon, on Kindle or print. I'm really excited. More details to follow. Stay tuned if you are interested. Whew, let's go. But until next time, everybody, remember to stay safe out there. I'll be seeing you in the next video.